Top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Set to go down this weekend. Unbeaten up-and-comer of the United Kingdom, Shannon Ryan will be taking on Xenia Joac.
Scheduled for 8 rounds in the women's super flyweight division, Shannon Ryan, an unbeaten up-and-comer with a high ceiling,
Sporting a professional record, an unblemished record of 5 wins with no losses, no draws, no recorded knockouts. Not yet. To Xenia, who sports a professional record of 11 wins with 6 losses, no draws,
3 knockouts.
Xenia, who was last in action late last year in October, won a decision, a southpaw.
Shannon's fighting a southpaw.
This will be Shannon Ryan's second fight, her second fight under the Matchroom banner since jumping ship from boxer over to Matchroom. Shannon was last in action earlier this year in June.
I think she had something like 4 fights under the boxer banner.
She's already had her first under Matchroom. Overall, I think she made the right choice. I think she made the right decision, even though the people at Boxer have a very big platform to advertise and promote their fighters in Sky. I'm not sure that Boxer, as a promotional outfit, has the same kind of leadership and know-how that you get from Matchroom, especially as it pertains to a female fighter.
A big part of the reason, at least in part, the explosion of women's boxing that we've been seeing the last 5 or 6 years, Matchroom's efforts have a lot to do with that.
Thus, I think Shannon made the right decision. I think she made the right choice. Now, she's going to be boxing Xenia Joac of Romania. This is a fighter that's been around the block, been in there with some very, very good fighters. Anyone from Dina Thorsland to Alicia Holskin, Kim Clavel, Alexis Kubitsky.
These are good fighters.
Xenia's been in there with a lot of good fighters, a lot of really good fighters. And what stands out is that even though she's got 6 losses, she's never been stopped.
Never been knocked out.
Speaks to her durability and her ability to survive.
Yeah.
A lot of these fighters that have their own unique characteristics, you know, the athleticism and power of Dina Thorsland, the speed and accuracy of Kim Clavel, of Alexis Kubitsky, that Xenia would have shared the ring with this many good fighters and she's never been knocked out. It's safe to say that Shannon,
in all likelihood, this goes to a decision. In all likelihood, Shannon won't knock her out. Shannon's a speedster.
what are Shannon Ryan's standout qualities based on what I've seen from her so far? She's athletic, she's fast, and she's sharp. Kind of like what you get from Kim Clavel. Not necessarily big on power, but that can be worked on.
Scheduled for 8 rounds in the women's super flyweight division.
Super flyweight, that's 115 pounds. That's where Mexico's own Ashley Gonzalez, she's got the WBC. Japan's own Mizuki Hiruta, she's got the WBO. And Argentina's Clara Lescurat, she's got the WBA. The IBF title,
I think it's vacant.
once held by Argentina's Maciela Lujan. I'm not completely sure what happened there, though I'm fairly confident that the title here and now is vacant.
Super flyweight division is bubbling with talent.
Lots of possibilities for this weight class, but it really isn't as talked about as, say, bantamweight, a super bantamweight, featherweight. You know, all those divisions north of 115 pounds where you might find an Ebony Bridges or a Ramla Ali, an Ellie Scottney, and Amanda Serrano. You get the gist of it. This division is talent-rich, but it's not as talked about, doesn't get the same coverage as some other weight classes. Perhaps now that Matchroom has a horse in the race.
That can change.
I mean, even the 2 divisions south of super flyweight, light flyweight, minimum weight, those divisions get talked about more than this one. But now that Matchroom is so invested in Shannon Ryan, who campaigns at Superfly, maybe they can bring some exposure to this weight class.
Through Shannon.
Through her. I'm not expecting any surprises tomorrow. I expect that Shannon should win what is a developmental fight with Xenia Joac.
Keep your eyes peeled for her on the undercard of Jai Opataya versus Jordan Thompson.
Men's welterweight news, the latest on Conor Benn, who vows to return to the welterweight division if the Eubank Jr. fight doesn't come back around.
Much to the chagrin of Matchroom's critics and Conor's detractors, he's back, whether they like it or not. He has resumed his boxing career with his recent win in Orlando.
Felt good at a career highest weight, but he can see a return to his natural welterweight frame in the near future. Only one notable exception will keep the Brit from moving down and perhaps will result in another move upward. Resurrected plans for an all-second-generation boxer showdown with heated rival Chris Eubank Jr. Of course I do, Ben told BoxingScene.com in an intimate group of UK reporters when asked if he can see that fight coming back into play. It's a massive domestic fight. The British fans want it. I think all around the world wants it. I want to do the world a favor and beat Eubank.
There was some who made light of Conor not knocking Rodolfo Orozco out.
You know what they were saying? They were saying that now that he's been in the hot seat and he's under scrutiny, all of a sudden the knockouts stop because he's not on the juice anymore.
That's what they were saying.
Never mind that the fight was fought at 154, not 147, where he used to campaign. Never mind that he had been out something like, 16 or 17 months, over a year?
People are going to think what they want to think.
No matter how unreasonable they are being. Whatever happens, happens. I might be able to go down to 147 and capture world titles there. There's big fights for me. All of the welterweight belts are here in America. I might be making a return to America very soon. If not, the only exception is going up to 160. Otherwise, it's back to 147.
Aside from Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr., just aside from those two, the only other welterweight with any kind of name value is Conor Benn.
It is. So, in the event that Terence Crawford moves up and vacates all those titles, and we think he's going to, right?
Right.
There's his opportunity, should he return to welterweight. Either of those two scenarios will be the case for his next fight. If it doesn't happen, the Eubank fight, listen, I've gone through so much in the past year and a half. Then, if it's not for me, it went past me, Ben said of a possible Eubank fight. If it's not for me, the doors are closed. That's where I am now and how I view things.
He doesn't have to have the Eubank fight, you understand. Chris Eubank is actually an older fighter who's further along in his career than Conor. Conor's career doesn't hang in the balance based on whether or not he fights Chris.
Don't misunderstand me. It's a big money fight. That fight sells. In the United Kingdom, it does. But if for some reason it don't go down and it don't happen, it's really not the end of the world for young Conroy. Conor, who's been under close scrutiny the last year or so. A lot of the boo birds are vexed that he has returned. So much so that perhaps they are overstepping their bounds.
Getting it, tiki torches out.
And all of their moral outrage that he hasn't quite cleared his name, at least not to their satisfaction. Boxing News had to print a retraction, an apology.
They went too far.
In response to a recent article written by Thomas Hauser and published by Boxing News, Matchroom Boxing has clarified that Conor Benn undertook appropriate VADA testing ahead of his recent comeback bout in Florida, complied with all applicable regulations, and that all legal procedures were followed. Further, Mr. Hauser's claim that Benn's scientific evidence had been rejected by UKAD was categorically false. The article should not have been published without Matchroom Boxing's position being included. Boxing News, therefore, apologizes to Matchroom Boxing and Conor Benn for the error and any harm it may have caused.
Not the first time people have gotten a little too carried away based on things that Thomas Hauser said, things that Thomas Hauser wrote.
It was Thomas Hauser who many years ago, quite famously, wrote up a lengthy article about Floyd Mayweather and potential use of banned substance. Many took the article as gospel. Many still do. They still cite it, not realizing Thomas was jumping to conclusions then the same way he's jumping to conclusions now.
The article and what he was saying, it wasn't accurate, it wasn't factual, and what it really was little more than Thomas Hauser's speculations, him jumping to conclusions.
His article and all of the points that he made was later debunked by USADA. I believe it was USADA.
Categorically debunked.
Bullet point for bullet point. Thomas Hauser was publishing inaccuracies then, and he's still publishing them now. Mr. Hauser's claim that Benn's scientific evidence had been rejected by UKAD, that was categorically false. And we know that it's false.
That it was.
Jumping to conclusions again. He does that. The fact of the matter is, the NADP lifted UKAD's provisional suspension of Conor Benn.
It was Mike Mazzulli of the Alphabet Commission here in America that said in plain English, he was frustrated with the BBBOC because they were being ambiguous. They didn't take a firm stance on Conor.
Likely because they couldn't. They can't make the recommendation that Conor be denied a boxing license in America when he's not under suspension in the UK. And that's what they've been saying the whole time. Nobody wanted to believe them.
Yeah, the people at the BBBOC probably preferred that Conor not be able to box, but under those circumstances, they can't make that recommendation.
They couldn't make it to the ABC Commission in Mike Mazzulli, and they couldn't make it to the Florida Athletic Commission when Conor petitioned for a license.
You've no grounds to make that recommendation.
In spite of those who wish for this to be a witch hunt, like Thomas Hauser, whose recent article was debunked.
Conor's resuming his boxing career. Get over it.
Conor Benn, who recently posted this image to his social media, Kell Brook, Chris Eubank, Jaron Boots Ennis, appear to be targets for the unbeaten up-and-comer. One or some of these fights is a bit more realistic than the other. Jaron Boots Ennis. There's nothing in it for Conor Benn in targeting Jaron Boots Ennis. Jaron Ennis, who seems to be loyal to Showtime, even though according to his father, he has no contract with them.
It's what Bozy Ennis said on the Stamina for Sale podcast.
Jaron Ennis' father. In so many words, he said they don't actually have a contract with Showtime, but they like how they're treated over there, so they are loyal to them. I don't imagine Eddie Hearn is gonna cart off Conor Benn over to Showtime, and I don't imagine that Jaron Ennis is going to go over to DAZN. Bottom line.
I don't think it happens.
Two more realistic options are either Chris Eubank Jr. at middleweight or Kell Brook at either junior middleweight or middleweight. Pick your poison.
Those two.
Kell Brook didn't officially retire. Even last year, he stated in plain English that he was eyeing the winner of Conor Benn versus Chris Eubank Jr. Now, granted, the fight didn't happen.
Kell Brook's still hanging around.
I think that Kell Brook would be a tune-up fight for Conor Benn at this point. It's been over a year's time since Kell Brook had that fight with Amir Khan, that big win.
For Conor Benn, Kell would be a tune-up fight. They could sell it. They could sell some tickets.
Business sense, but in a sporting sense, at this point, having not fought in such a long time, being in his mid-30s, Kell Brook would be little more than a tune-up fight with a familiar face for Conor Benn, presumably at 154 or 160. Good weights for Kell Brook at this point. I don't think he can make welter anymore.
Kell and Chris, realistic options.
Realistic fights for Conor Benn. He can make up for lost time with Kell Brook if for some reason Chris is dragging his feet.
Conor's back, whether you like it or not.
So spare me all the pearl clutching. You're just grasping at straws at this point.
This has been dragged out long enough.
And finally, in men's heavyweight news per a tweet from Mike Kopinger via his sources, Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk have signed contracts for an undisputed heavyweight championship fight in Saudi Arabia, multiple sources told ESPN. The fight could take place December 23rd or sometime in January, sources said. Fury first meets Francis Ngannou on October 28th in Saudi Arabia. In my previous video, the one I uploaded right before this one, we talked about Tyson Fury's very recent comments about how Usyk is a nobody and he's a superstar. How Fury sees no need to fight him.
The stuff he told Michelle Joy Phelps, that undisputed was never his goal. It was never his priority. It was always someone else's dream.
And now this. A full 180, that the deal has been signed and the fight between them could happen as soon as December or January. My thoughts. If this news were coming to us after the Francis Ngannou fight and not before it,
which is important,
I might believe it a little more. I might actually get out the confetti. But the fact of the matter is, they still have that fight to sell, and Tyson Fury has been garnering himself and what remains of his career a lot of negative press. Openly blowing off the Usyk fight, saying it's not his priority, it's not important.
He's made himself subject to a lot of criticism.
My entire stance, my demeanor towards this recent announcement is that, you know what, I've read that book before.
I have.
Between now and whenever this fight is supposed to take place, Tyson Fury could somehow muck things up again, because that's what he always does. That, for me and my money, and from where I'm sitting, you still have that Ngannou fight to sell. You still have to try to sell that later on this month. And because of the way you've been carrying on, you've made yourself subject to a lot of criticism. So, is it possible that you saying you're not going to fight Usyk after this, is it possible that affected the Ngannou fight and what that's going to do?
Two ways I look at this.
He's still got to try to sell that Francis Ngannou fight later on this month. That circus fight. And that circus fight in Tyson Fury's career has very little appeal if it's not building up towards something, if it's not all four undisputed. That's one way I look at it. That perhaps a part of the reason they're making this announcement is to get people to buy the Ngannou fight with the promise of an Usyk fight. Francis ain't a boxer. He's not in your league. Everybody knows that.
The people that have followed your boxing career up until this point, they're not going to be but so excited to see you box a guy that doesn't box.
Not unless there's something bigger and better coming after that. The only thing bigger and better left for you to do is to box Usyk. That's it.
You keep telling people you don't feel like it, you don't want to do that, he doesn't deserve it, yada, yada, yada.
Been telling people in so many words not to hold their breath for that fight, so what the hell's supposed to make this one attractive? We all know this guy's not a boxer.
That being said, maybe the reason that this news is coming to us ahead of the Ngannou fight is to smooth things over with Tyson Fury's critics. Make this fight more marketable with the promise of an Usyk fight after it.
Maybe that's what it is. Or maybe Tyson Fury finally decided to come around due to the backlash.
Bullying works.
All the criticism that he faced and the fact that now Zhilei Zhang has him in his crosshairs. That a lot of people are gunning for Tyson Fury.
Might as well fight this guy.
For fighting a giant Chinaman who just so happens to be a southpaw, guy who just annihilated Joe Joyce. Why fight a giant southpaw when you can fight a smaller one?
Maybe that's it.
Two possible scenarios here in association with this recent announcement. It's either a clever ruse to get people's hopes up so they can keep selling this Ngannou fight, or Fury's actually serious, he's actually gonna fight Usyk, and the reason for it is he's been bullied into fighting Usyk. Neither would surprise me, though ultimately, in either event, in either scenario, my stance remains the same. I'll believe it when I see it. With Tyson Fury, things can always go wrong. So when you tell me that he's signed on to fight Usyk, yeah, I'll believe it when they're in the ring.
I'll believe it when the opening bell sounds. Between now and December, and now and January. That's too much time for Tyson Fury to fuck things up.
Has a unique knack for that, a unique talent for fucking things up. So I'll believe it when I see it.
He's gonna fight Usyk having not boxed an actual boxer in over a year's time?
All right, if you say so. But I'll believe it when I see it.